Hi scholars, welcome back to Read Aloud. I'm excited today to finish our biography on Harriet Tubman. We've been learning so far about Harriet Tubman's childhood and some of her goals. Today we get to learn more about her accomplishments and the rest of her life. I left you yesterday with a thinking job. I asked you, why did Harriet Tubman go off alone without her brothers? I was impressed because I read your responses about how you guys were naming that in the text it told us how terrible slavery was and how Harriet said, I had a right to liberty or death. And that lets us know that more than anything, Harriet Tubman wanted to be free, even if it meant going to do something dangerous and probably pretty scary by herself. Let's read what happened next to Harriet. Harriet ran to the house of a white woman who had once offered to help her. The woman told Harriet which house to go to next. The people in the second house directed Harriet to another house farther north. Harriet was traveling on what was known as the Underground Railroad. Each stop on the railroad was the house of someone who believed slavery was wrong and was willing to help runaway slaves find their way to freedom. So with what we know about this time period and how if slaves found their way to the north, they would be free, and this information in the text, this helps us understand that the Underground Railroad helped slaves to reach north so that they could be free. Let's stop and think about why this woman helped Harriet Tubman. Well, in the text, it says that each stop on the railroad was the house of someone who believed slavery was wrong and was willing to help runaway slaves find their way to freedom. So that lets us know that this woman wants to help Harriet Tubman and even other people who are enslaved, and she wants them to be free. Harriet hid during the day. She traveled at night until she reached Pennsylvania. There was a law in the state against owning slaves. Harriet Tubman was a free woman. She felt like a new person. She said later, the sun came like gold through the trees and over the fields, and I felt like I was in heaven. During the years between 1850 and 1860, Harriet worked as a cook, dishwasher, and cleaning woman. She used much of the money she earned to make 19 trips south to lead about 300 slaves to freedom. Many of them were her own relatives. Why did Harriet Tubman make 19 trips south? We know and learned yesterday that it was very dangerous there for a woman like Harriet. We know that she could have been caught or hurt. Why would Harriet Tubman make 19 trips south? Well, let's think about what the text said. In the text, we learned how horrible slavery was, not just for Harriet, but for other people. And in the text, Harriet said she felt like a new person once she was a free woman. That lets us know that Harriet really wanted to help other people become free, even if that meant she was putting herself in danger. She found a lot of joy and freedom and wanted other people to experience that. We have some good text evidence now to describe what Harriet was like. What do you think Harriet Tubman was like? I agree with you. Harriet was courageous. I know she was courageous because, one, she went off by herself without her brothers to find freedom. And two, she took 19 different trips to the south to help other people, even though that was so dangerous. Harriet Tubman was courageous. Harriet took them from one safe house to the next. Sometimes she led them as far as Canada. She was a conductor on the Underground Railroad. At times, Harriet disguised herself as a weak old woman or as a man. She used songs as a secret code, and when the runaways were hiding and it was safe to come out, she would sing a joyful song. Hail, oh hail, ye happy spirits. The runaway slaves recognized Harriet's deep, husky voice. In 1858, Harriet met John Brown, a leader in the movement to end slavery. He called her one of the best and bravest people in America. He called her General Tubman. In November of 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected president, and 11 southern states withdrew from the United States. They didn't want Lincoln, a man who hated slavery, as their leader. The war between the North and South, the Civil War, began on April 12th in 1861. During the war, Harriet Tubman worked as a nurse and a spy for the Northern Army. She went into enemy territory and led hundreds of slaves to freedom. She helped care for slaves who ran north during the fighting. In December of 1865, soon after the Civil War ended, an amendment to the United States Constitution was passed. Slavery was no longer allowed in the United States. After the war, Harriet Tubman returned to her home in Auburn, New York. John Tubman died in 1867. In 1869, Harriet married a former slave and soldier for the Northern Army, Nelson Davis. In Auburn, she went from house to house selling vegetables. Whenever she went, she was asked to tell about her adventures on the Underground Railroad. Harriet Tubman helped many former slaves who came to her in Auburn. She supported the suffragist movement, which was the fight for the right of women to vote in the United States. Harriet helped establish a home in Auburn for sick, poor, and homeless Black people. When she moved into that home in 1911, she was old and weak. "I can hear the bells are ringing. I can hear the angels singing," she said. Soon after that, on March 10th, 1913, she died. She was more than 90 years old. Harriet Tubman was a brave, courageous woman. She was admired and loved by the many people who knew her. She was a conductor on the railway to freedom. Scholars, we know that most biographies are written about important people from the past. So I want to stop now that we've read the entire biography on Harriet Tubman and we know more about her life, her accomplishments, and goals. We can figure out why someone decided to write a biography about Harriet Tubman. We know that must mean she is an important historical figure. And now your job is to figure out and write down, why is Harriet Tubman considered an important historical figure? When you're writing, make sure you think about all of the different things we've learned so far in the text. Why is Harriet Tubman an important historical figure?